And as we are on our endless search for the oh so elusive snowflakes around here, I'm Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe and Joe Weather Show on this Tuesday, the 7th of
Yes,
January,
here we are.
2020.
And you're right. There's nothing happening up my way. I know your way down in Long Island, you've got a few wet snowflakes. It's a
I
big
do,
spread.
but I have to show you something, Joe, because this is just like one of those moments where um, you got kind of get frustrated. And let me bring up, I'll bring it up right. We'll get going right off the bat. And by the way, this system was actually really outperformed in places like uh, South Central and parts of Southeastern Pennsylvania down into Maryland, anywhere from a couple of inches to maybe as much as 5 or 6 in some places. They had heavy snow for at least 1 hour that I saw both in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. But I got to show you this radar because this is where I get really frustrated. So this is the view from Fort Dix in New Jersey. And I'm in that patch of green that's over Long Island. I'm right in the middle of that. And at least for a while, for about 15 minutes, while I was sitting underneath that green. In fact, I'm even going to just jump over to the Upton radar because it shows it even better. It's not only green, but it's like yellow with a big ball of red just east of me. And I literally couldn't even, I could see like barely a couple of dandruff flakes coming down with all that radar coverage. So whatever's going on hadn't quite worked its way down to ground level yet. But the radar for over me, over Suffolk County at least, is pretty impressive. If it stays this way for the next 4 or 5 hours, I might wind up putting down a couple of inches out of this.
But meanwhile, as you can see where I am, it almost looks like you can see the back edge already moving out of northwestern New Jersey. So for the Hudson Valley, this is going to be kind of a nothing event with, maybe a little bit of precipitation. I mentioned a few hours ago on a live chat that I did both on YouTube and also on my own Facebook page. I said, all right, maybe a sugar coating to maybe a half an inch. Sometimes
Right.
it doesn't even
I
look like to
basically,
make sugar coating.
yeah, I mean, I basically just kind of covered in a very general, broad area of a coating to a couple of inches. And I figured some places south and west of here, way south and west of where I am, would finish with some upside. And some places north and west, we're going to finish with some downside. The coastal low is taking over. And actually, there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about tonight with this. And let me get that GOES satellite. It disappeared on me. It was going to reload up. But if you look at the loop, so you've got this shortwave that is moving now through the into the through the Mid-Atlantic states, and then you've got this other strong shortwave that's dropping down through the Great Lakes. This could have actually been, if there was a little bit more phasing, this could actually have wound up being a solid 3 to 5, 4 to 6 inch snowfall for much of the area from New Jersey through southern New England. But that northern stream shortwave is probably a handful of hours too late and a little bit on the flattish side right now. So it's just kind of holding this thing down a bit. Yet at the same time, we are getting some kind of coastal low development. So I want to be a little bit careful because this to me is one of those situations where you get a couple of wobbles in one direction or another, and at least in a small sense, in a small scale, uh, maybe parts of Long Island, southernmost New England, southeastern New England, gets under a core of solid precip for a few hours, and suddenly you got 2 or 3 fresh inches on the ground. So I just want to be a little cautious about that. That there'll be some kind of little wobble.
And the combination of this system strengthening to our north and east, and a cold front, an Arctic front, moving on down from our north and west, the coalescing of these two systems during the afternoon hours tomorrow, picking the winds up significantly and sending forth for, albeit a short time, a blast of some colder air, gusty winds. And tomorrow may actually be, as you would refer to it, a cheap thrill if we pick up a few snow showers and maybe, as we did a few weeks ago, a brief isolated snow squall. That's not
Yeah,
completely.
I went the snow squall route. I also I've been talking about it since yesterday. I kind of went the route of the snow squalls for a possibility for tomorrow in the afternoon. And the last time we had the snow squall issue, was it a few weeks ago? It actually turned out to be quite the snow squall that rolled through New York City and areas nearby. I've got the HRRR model, the latest run up. One of the things I noticed today about the HRRR is that it wasn't cold enough. So, it's got it raining over Long Island, at least over me, and I've got snow falling right now. The air upstairs is very cold, and all it's really taking is some intensity to get that cold air to work down to the ground. Now, the HRRR just sort of moves this thing along and really doesn't produce very much. It's a very tight, compact little low that a very limited extent of precip, even though there's some heavy precip, just literally just offshore. So again, if you wind up getting a little bit of a wobble to the northwest in the next few hours, might prove interesting for areas east and northeast of New York City. And then, as you said, this is all going to crank up into the big wind. We've got a strong upper trough. I'm bringing the nav up now, the 500. And you'll see, this upper trough that's dropping down over the. Let me just back it up. You can see the southern shortwave on here for 7 o'clock this evening. I'm going to draw, the axis of the trough here. You got this southern shortwave that is pivoting northeastward, and then you've got the northern stream that's still hanging pretty far back. It's trying to kind of give it a little shot of energy here, but it is not being completely successful, or at least not successful enough as that lifts up. So they come through as two separate entities, and that's some very cold air aloft that is swinging through here tomorrow. So we're going to get that second short wave to come through here tomorrow afternoon. And I think we could wind up with maybe some snow showers and some snow squalls with that.
Now, something that Tim Veltman mentioned just a few moments ago on the chat board, and what do you think about it? I'm just pulling up on my own screen here and looking at this myself. The possibility for maybe tomorrow, as the front moves by, for maybe a little convection, a little lightning or thunder, perhaps, or
Well, I got to tell you, Joe, this has been these last 4 or 5 weeks. We've seen snow squalls. I forgot when it was. Was it last week? One day when they ran through upstate New York, they had um, lightning and thunder with them.
right.
Um,
That's
and
what you're alluding to. Yeah.
yeah, and why not? Why not? We seem to be having thunderstorms happening, in inside cold air. Look at the icing situation that was up in New England. Not that, when was that? Back before New Year's, where you wound up with thunderstorms with hail and temperatures in the 20s. I still have been racking my brains out. I don't remember ever seeing anything quite like that. But I agree with you. There could be maybe some convection tomorrow.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. So far, this winter has had more convection, I think, than we had all of last spring.
I know, isn't that hilarious? And
Really
that
wild.
that also reminds me too. You got SPC yesterday on its day 6, showing severe weather threat for the Gulf states, and you don't see that too often. Day 6 is certainly not in January. Do you see
Correct.
a day 6? I'm just bringing up the surface map here, and hang on. I just want to let's put the dew point on here, and let me get a few extra obs so we can look close. Come on, zoom for me, baby. There we go. I'm just looking at the observations that are. You got all the winds in southern New Jersey and down in Delaware are now mostly northeast or north, and temperatures have dropped down into even down to freezing right now. It's 32 in Sicklerville in South Jersey. I'm starting to see where Millville is. Upper Dealfield is 33, 35 at Andorra Hospital. Hamilton is 34. So you got temperatures down in the low 30s. I'm thinking it's probably mostly wet snow now going on. I'm trying to just see from some of these obs. I'm trying to get one that actually reports an observation. Light snow at Mount Holly and 34. Atlantic City, where are you, ACY? Oh, God, I'm trying to find it. Ugh. Atlantic City International Airport is light rain and 38. Down in Delaware, you've got temperatures that are down in the low 30s. Uh, Washington, D.C. Let me see if I can find Baltimore and Washington, D.C. Baltimore is 1 mile in light snow. They were S plus back a couple of hours ago. And hang on. There's D.C. is now after reporting heavy snow at Reagan Airport. It's now 36 and light rain there, so they lost intensity. But looking at these winds, Joe, there's a coastal low that has developed off of South Jersey and the Delaware coast. There's a buoy out east of Delaware that's got a northwest wind. So that's the surface low, the coastal low now taking over, and we're seeing the result of that on the what's happening on the radar. Where from earlier, I've got this really impressive area that came out of the Tennessee Valley and moved into the mid-Atlantic states and on up into Pennsylvania. But now we're starting to see it just kind of concentrate around that coastal low, and the northern and the northwestern part of that precip is all beginning to dry up.
So it would appear that again a quickie event. It's out of here certainly everywhere by midnight, and then we'll just look toward tomorrow and see what nature has in store for us. It looks like the actual frontal passage will be probably sometime within an hour or two of noon tomorrow across the immediate tri-state area. And then the winds rev up, and we'll see how this all plays out. Colder air. Temperatures tomorrow should be up near 40, but they're probably going to feel in the afternoon with the wind more like the 20s to around 30.
Right. And then teens to low 20s Thursday morning, not out of the 30s on Thursday. But then here comes the big warm up. For Friday and particularly for Saturday, I think we're going to see 60s in a lot of places, up maybe even into southern New England and up by you if we play our cards right.
Well, I've already told my wife that Saturday is the day when we're going to put everybody, Santa, Frosty, all the lights, take them down and put them in the box because, I mean, you can't. I've spent many a year either putting them up or taking them down in frigid temperatures, and by the end of the day, my fingers felt like wood. But I'm not going to pass up on a possibility of temperatures near 60 to do all of that on Saturday.
No, deep trough in the west. You've got an upper high that's building off of southeast Florida over the Bahamas. Southwest flow going all the way up into southeastern Canada. And that is going to mean for some warm temperatures. And there's a shortwave trough that's coming out from that western trough that moves across Texas and into the middle Mississippi Valley. And from this, I'm going to bring up SPC and take a look at what they're doing here on their longer range. But they actually have for Friday. So Friday is day 5 and for day 4. So Friday is day 4, and they have a 30% enhanced risk of severe weather for northeastern Texas, northwest Louisiana, southwestern Arkansas, southeastern Oklahoma, and a 15%, which would be slight risk, surrounding that, going almost up to the Missouri state line and taking in the rest of the northwestern half of Louisiana and a good chunk of eastern Texas. So that's really impressive for them. If they're seeing something 6 days out in January, this is probably going to be a pretty decent. When I say decent, I mean from the standpoint of size. I'm not making a personal statement that severe weather is a good thing. just to make that clear. And then on Saturday into Sunday, Joe, that whole 15 to 30% area shifts into Mississippi and Alabama, Tennessee, West Georgia, the Florida Panhandle, and the rest of Louisiana and Mississippi. So very unusual to see severe weather risk indicated in the out days. We go oftentimes during the severe weather season. You don't see it too often when they show it in the out days.
Yeah, and that would suggest maybe for us Saturday night or early Sunday that we may see some convection activity. I mean, nothing severe, but maybe a few peals of thunder or a flash or two of lightning as that next system rolls on through again early on Sunday.
Right, and I'm just whipping through the upper air here. There's the short wave kind of lifts up to the northeast. The ridge is still in the east to a large degree into the first part of next week. You start to see the GFS, at least from some earlier runs, beginning to what looks like it wants to start moving a few chess pieces around to a certain extent. And by the time we get toward the end of this forecast period, Joe, we're maybe right around, say, the 19th or the 20th. The last couple of days, it's been showing this more and more. So if you're looking for encouraging signs of a wintry weather pattern emerging from this pattern we have now, they're starting to show up on some of the models in the mid to long range. And today it's kind of carried through a bit, so getting some follow through. But you got suddenly the trough is gone in the west. You've got a deep trough running from western Hudson's Bay, a very broad, deep, bowlish type trough that goes all the way down to Louisiana, and a fairly strong flow at the end of the forecast period of coming down from northern Canada into the eastern U.S. So maybe we're finally seeing some signs that things are going to be changing.
Yeah, this Climate Prediction Center still keeps us above normal, although by the 8 to 14 day outlook, you start seeing things trending back to more normal over upstate New York and northern New England. So that may be a signal that maybe after about the 21st or 22nd of January, that we may actually see a flip back to colder conditions. But again, it looks like at least for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be more or less in a above normal temperature pattern. And the other thing that's impressive to me is that right straight through these next 2 weeks, precipitation above normal throughout much of the country.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm liking here from the standpoint of a return to colder weather in the longer term, seeing heights and pressures building up in the Greenland, up in Greenland, and also the fact that you're moving the ridge away from from the latitude of Hawaii and replacing that with an approaching trough, which is coming to 160 west. So if you usually when you get a trough at 160 west, the trough wants to be in the east. So look, no one knows if this is going to be right or if we're going to start seeing this getting pushed back every day for another 2 days and 2 days, and it never seems to get here. That's always a possibility. I would just say that weather patterns don't last forever. They run 4 to 6 weeks, and then they start to they got to move around. The atmosphere has to try and reload. So what we're having right now, if you want to date it back to about December 20th, that carries up to about January 19th, January 20th, which is a full month, and then we'll see a switch, and we'll see what that does. The switch listen, just because you get a pattern change from a pattern that's not favorable doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go to a pattern that's favorable. You may go to a pattern that means that it brings colder temperatures, but it may not necessarily bring precipitation with it. There's nothing that says it can't be cold and dry. So just bear that in mind.
Chuck Cardillo, in fact, on the board just said, "Do I hear 80s?"
No, Chuck, it's a little bit much, especially for the west, 3,000 feet up in the west side of the Catskills. You have a tough time getting there in the summertime.
I noticed here, Westchester County Airport, just looking ahead Saturday, the record high for Westchester Airport, 57, set back in 1975. That's a cheapy record high when you consider that there are other times, like, for example, January 6th. I don't see how they did this, but they did this fairly recently, Joe. January 6th, the record at Westchester Airport was 70. I don't even remember that. 70 on the 6th of January, 2007. But this one coming up on Saturday, 57, that's certainly well within range of being erased. So we'll see how that all pans out. But it definitely looks like a brief shot of cold air the next day or two. And then, as you know, it's going to warm up quite significantly for Friday. And the peak or the pinnacle will probably be on Saturday. And again, as you mentioned, that convective activity, the severe weather many days out by the Storm Prediction Center, it's quite possible that when we get into precipitation Saturday night, early Sunday, that could be of a convective nature, and we could
Yeah.
see some thundery weather here too.
So I agree. I got the latest the GFS surface map up, just looking at later this week, and of course you see the high goes out. Let me just roll it back for tomorrow. You can actually pick out tomorrow morning, as Joe pointed out. This next the upper trough, and there's kind of a secondary weather front that's moving on through. So you're thinking about midday or early afternoon for it to go by, maybe a little bit of squally activity, and there's that cold 1034 high that comes down behind it. It's a quick shot of cold air. We've had one of those moments, one of those very short stretches here where the upper flow has connected with the polar vortex way up up in the Arctic region, because that's where it's trapped. So we've got a little bit of bleed through with some very cold air. Quick shot and gone. Your high goes off the Virginia coast. The southwest isobars are there. I'm thinking, Friday might not be too bad a day in terms of sky condition. That's the one thing you got to always be careful of when you're looking at, soaring temperatures this time of year. Usually, those warm patterns are complicated by a lot of clouds and sometimes with a flow off the ocean. This one, at least for Friday, doesn't seem that way. And even for Saturday, the frontal boundary is so far up, and we don't have a backdoor nearby. The frontal boundary is so far up north of Plattsburgh and on up into southern Canada. Meanwhile, with this low coming out, Joe, out of Texas and running up into western Ohio, there could be some significant icing and snow in northwestern Missouri, northwestern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, just north and west of Chicago, as that low goes by. And then, as you said, coming Saturday night, cold low up in northern PA, trailing cold front going by with some showers and storms. Not much of a cool shot behind this one. And then more rain. Looks like late Monday night and on Tuesday. And there's you look at where the low is going. You've got a low that goes to southwestern PA and redevelops off the New Jersey coast and Long Island. There's no cold air, obviously. And then after that, another low that goes into western PA and redevelops over Delaware. This time there's a little more cold air over the lakes and in upstate New York and New England. We're at January 17th. And as we pointed out, the pattern, overall the upper air does start to turn a bit colder in the longer term. Once we get past January 20th, there's progressively colder air. But again, what it means specifically beyond day 7 or 8, that's all up in the air as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and looking at Saturday night, Joe, along the eastern seaboard, an interesting dichotomy, if you will, for the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, including right here in the tri-state New York area. It's all-out rain, but you don't have to go too far north. Now, this may be something of interest to, let's say, people like Tim Beltman, who's in the Albany area. North of Albany, it looks like there could be a pretty good icing event coming up on Saturday night, early Sunday morning. And if you go even further north than that, to the New York Canadian border and on up into northernmost New England, a pretty good snowstorm. So you've got all precipitation types represented in the Northeast on Saturday night, from rain to sleet to ice to even snow. And so it could
And
be
beach weather down in the southeast of Florida.
right,
In
right.
fact, just for laughs, since Chuck did mention the 80s, let me just take a look at something here. Okay, so I'm going to go to, what is it, 90 hours takes us to Saturday morning. So let's bring up the the
2 meter
2 meter
temperature.
temperatures.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go to 18Z Saturday. Well, I mean, the GFS has got some 80s in Florida, a couple of pockets of 80s, 70, the 70-degree line, into northeastern North Carolina, and then it's kind of 60s. But this is a little tough to swallow that it's not
Yeah, but
only going to get to 55 up in New
but
York.
but Joe, look, I'm looking at the GFS 2 meter air temperature, and look at a place like Messina, New York, or yeah, that's Messina, not Burlington, Vermont. 18Z, it's 50 degrees.
Right.
When you get to 7 o'clock in the evening, 6 hours later, it's 33. And then when you get to 1 a.m.,
It's what,
16
16.
degrees.
Yeah,
Ah,
I can see that. In fact, the 15, the 20-degree line gets pretty far south by Sunday afternoon down into the Albany area. The 20,
right,
well, the 25 actually.
well, 22 at 7 a.m. in Albany, 22 at 1 p.m. in Albany. Now, this is again long range and not to be taken at face value. Things will obviously change, but I mean, my God, what a difference between it. Literally is a jump from spring to earlier midwinter within a span of 24 hours over upstate New York.
And in spite of the fact that we've got this, if we had this humongously negative PNA index that's going on, if we had any kind of blocking to speak of, which we don't, that frontal boundary could have wound up being further south, but it's just not there. That's a pretty decent high, that 1038 high of north of Lake Superior. So there is very cold air, at least poised in southeastern Canada, to kind of come on in as after one of these waves goes by. So yeah, why not? Put a little snow and ice on the cake in upstate New York. That's all they need up in northern New England is an ice storm.
Yeah,
Usually that happens when they get those. That's usually in La Nina or in El Nino years. So it kind of tells you, you know, how out of whack this is because we have neither one happening. So this is all being driven by the fact that the polar vortex is nowhere to be found. There's no real connection between the cold air. I'm going to bring the upper air back up just to show everybody because we've been doing this from time to time. Again, if you look at this jet stream for Sunday, I'll just back it up because you'll see it even better here. On Thursday and Friday, and going into Saturday, the flow across Canada is pretty much from west to east. There is very little bleed through coming down. With the cold air, the vortex is sitting up in Baffin Bay, right on the coast of Greenland. So all your Arctic air is pinned up way up there, and it's got no way to get down here because there's no connection. There's no flow that runs from that where that Arctic air is to areas further south. So it's all about the Pacific then just kind of moving things along back and forth, and your big upper high off the southeast coast because you got your trough in the west and you've got the ridge out at 160. So it's late in the forecast period that all these things start to change, and we'll see if that trend continues over the next coming days. Listen, I want to bring this up, Joe. So last night, two things, because Scott Briller mentioned this to me, and I forgot to mention this last night. So if Central Park can manage 1/10 of an inch of snow, it will have 2/10 of an inch of snow. It would have 2.8 inches of snow for the season. And
right.
assuming that New York City doesn't see another flake or an ice pellet for the rest of the winter, it will prevent it from being the least snowiest winter on record. In case you or anybody else at home was concerned that we may not see another flake or an ice pellet for the next 2 months, you would wind up falling short of making this the least snowiest winter on record for New York City. The other thing was, of course, this being January 7th, we can go back 23 years ago on this date, and I'll pull the surface map up. And because everybody seems to reminisce about the blizzard of 96, which started for Long Island anyway, on Sunday morning of January 7th. And I brought up the surface map up, so I just like maybe you've got some memories and thoughts that you'd like to share about the 1040-ish high that was sitting to our north and northwest, and the developing low in the Carolinas.
Well, the thing about that, and I remember up until Friday night, well, Friday night would be what, January 5th.
Right.
There was still some question. The models, a couple of models, we were using the old AVN model, if you remember at the time, and the AVN kind of pushed that storm just out to sea to our south. In fact, I remember one forecaster at the Hydrometeorological Center, now the Weather Prediction Center, kind of suggesting, looking at analogs and suggesting that that would be similar to a storm of a few years earlier where the bulk of the heavy snow passed just south of New York. We got something, but the most of the lion's share of the snow passed off to our south. But then all of a sudden, come Saturday, actually Friday night late into Saturday, it suddenly became very obvious that we were not going to miss out on this, that this was going to be, and Saturday afternoon, I remember saying to myself, this looks like most definitely 1 to 2 feet, not 1 to 2
Yes.
inches. It was a very obvious scenario that we were going to see one of the great snowstorms of all time in our area, probably the biggest storm that we've had going back to the blizzard of '78.
Snowed for 36 hours straight here on Long Island. I left when the first snowflakes began to fall at about 8:30 or 9 in the morning to go to work. And I got home when the last snowflakes pulled out at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon the next day on Monday. I was up all night. I lost the four wheel drive on my truck
Oh,
in the middle of all of this. So I had to maneuver my way home, and thankfully on Monday was able to do so. It was really quite the event. I think we all had been. You know what it was, Joe? I think and we had a few in the winter of 93, 94, at least out on Long Island. We had a few, a couple of storms. We had two storms within 3 days of each other that produced up to a foot of snow out of both of them.
I remember
So,
that, the
and
Wednesday and Friday event.
right, and that culminated in, I believe, on the after the second one, waking up the next morning, seeing two things I had never seen before: freezing rain at the temperature of 12,
Oh,
and also waking up to 2 degrees below zero when it was all over with on the Saturday morning. Uh, and during the superstorm of '93, we had about 9 or 10 inches. It was the first 10-inch snowfall since the '83 storm before it changed over to sleet and rain, and then it was done. But this one was like, I think, for most of the folks that you and I grew up with in the weather world, this was the storm that I think everybody was kind of waiting for after a 13-year drought.
I was at a supermarket just as the first flakes were beginning to fall. I was living in Levittown, Long Island at the time, and I ran to the supermarket to get provisions, extra provisions for the house. And I got to tell you, Joe, it was like nuclear fallout was coming.
Mm-hmm.
I never saw. I mean, like everybody in that supermarket were flying around, and it was. Those of you who are into physics, if you know what Brownian motion is, this was Brownian motion with human beings. Everybody going every which way in that supermarket, trying to prep up before the big storm, really revved up later on that afternoon and at night. And thunder and lightning with that one, I might point out too.
Wasn't it nice, by the way? It just occurred to me because that was pre-social media. So when a snowstorm was mentioned, plus, well, let me just say this: this was coming at a time too where there were only probably a few of us on air that were making, that were talking about the seriousness of what was about to happen, and there were a lot of outlets that really didn't catch on to this until very late in the game. But this was at a time where you didn't have people running out 3 or 4 days before. If we talked about the possibility of this 7 or 8 days out, but not in the same context like today, where you get these posts go up right away all over social media about the imminent storm 7 or 10 days from now. We didn't put those prints on. There was no place to put them. It was not like you had. This was 1996. The internet was at its early stages, so the public reaction you probably had more people. You waited till maybe the day before or the day of to go out and get stuff, as opposed to raiding supermarkets a week in advance and emptying shelves.
Yeah, and as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, there were still some computer models that were somewhat uncertain about whether or not we were going to get hammered or whether or not we would miss out on the main event up until about Friday afternoon, Friday evening. In fact, I remember at News 12 Westchester that on the 7-day outlook box that for Friday, Saturday, I had the term "the jury is still out," and the jury came back in late Friday night and rendered its decision. We're going to get it, and I think by then anybody and everyone who hoped that perhaps we were going to miss out on a major storm, what happened? We did miss out, and that's when everything started going really crazy here Saturday into Sunday and on into Monday.
I'm just kind of thinking now, at least if it happens, I'm not having to drive in it, and that is something that I am truly happy about. That I don't have to drive in it. By the way,
Yes, to get that phone call literally just before the storm's worst part descends upon the region, and all of a sudden you hear either your assignment editor or the assistant news director or the executive producer. It was never when I used to work. It was never the news director. It was always one of those people saying, "We want you in," or "We need you right now," even though it was an off day, and not to have to worry about that at this moment in time. Yeah, that's a bit of stress. That's well, if you wonder why my hair is so white, a goodly amount of that white was from all of those episodes in the past.
yeah, I know, I hear you. Well, at least that stress now is not
Unless
something
I'm
that.
unless I'm stupid enough to get back into it.
Yeah, no, we're not doing that. I'm not doing that.
Well, you're not doing that, but maybe I don't know.
I am. I'm perfectly content in my little world. Just checking on the chat here to see if anyone has any questions. As they're all depressed over the fact that we're in a warm weather pattern. By the way, in case you weren't here back a number of days ago, looking at weather history, uh, if you look back, the winters in the East are long littered with stretches like this, where you warm up and you've got temperatures that climb up into the 50s and even into the 60s. This is not something new. It is not something unusual. So just in case everybody's memories are very short. That's the one thing, Joe, I find is that when you hear people talk about weather. It's amazing how short people's memories are. So thankfully, our memories are still intact and a bit longer, and we can at least bring out the fact that there's nothing really strange about what we're seeing this winter. It just most winters are like this here in our neck of the woods, anyway.
Well, this is going to be at least later in the week, and especially the start of the weekend, if I may use the term January. It would seem.
Yes.
And I remember that winter of 72, 73, by the way, all of 2.8 inches at Central Park. And at that time, and I'm sure you were too, were really into snow and being disappointed time and time again. In that winter, if I remember correctly, every time it did get cold enough to set the stage for a big winter storm, the storm in question always seemed to pass just off to our south. In fact,
Yeah.
I remember there was one particular case, I think it was in mid January of 73, where it looked like we were really going to get hammered on the following two. It was a Sunday, and there was some talk that we could get hammered Monday night and Tuesday of the upcoming week. And what happened? The storm went right out underneath us, and we never saw it. You know, it was that frustrating type of a winter. 2.8 inches for the whole season, as you just mentioned. If we get a tenth of an inch here tonight of snow in Central Park, we'll match that. And to say that we're not going to see any more snow after tonight, from now through the end of the winter, I think
Yeah, that's
that would be a
probably,
stretch.
yeah, that we are. Christina Pedia on a different subject matter says how many hours of dew points above 70 or 75 did we have in 2019 as compared to 2018? I'm going to just guess off the top of my head because I remember 2018, particularly in the month of September into early October, we had that brutal stretch that seemed to last for about 2 or 3 weeks where we had those ridiculously high dew points into the 70s. I'm going to say that probably in 2019 we had fewer days than 2018. I got to find that Iowa website. I think it was from the University of Iowa, where or Iowa State, where you can put in date parameters for certain other parameters. You match them up, and you can find out the data for the dew points and plot it on a chart. How many days the dew points were up above 70.
Well,
I just got to find the link. I got it somewhere.
you remember Halloween? This past Halloween,
Yes.
you and I were working over at the FiOS One Weather Center, and it was like 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, and I think we had, on average, in the area, we had a temperature of around 75 and a dew point of 70 on Halloween. That was what's helped set up, by the way, the thunderstorms, the tornadoes, the wild weather that took place during the first part of that night. And again, that was pretty darn late in the season to see those kind of dew points and even that kind of warmth.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of those 70 plus dew points. I'm just not. It's one thing when you're down in Florida because at least that's the humidity that you see down in the south, in the deep south, and in Florida is totally different, in my opinion, from how it feels as opposed to
Absolutely.
the humidity up here. Up here,
Yeah.
the air doesn't move. It just doesn't move, and you can cut it with a knife. Down there, at least, there's always a breeze of one sort or another to move the air around. So um, it's a little easier to handle. That's just how I felt about it. Some people might have different opinions about that.
I was down in Florida in August of 1983 to view the first night launch of the space shuttle. That was STS-8. I'd never been subjected to Florida heat and humidity in mid or late summer. One thing I can tell you, which I think plays a factor, is the fact that down there, the sun is about 10 or 15 degrees higher in the sky than it is here
Right.
in late August. And the intensity of that higher sun combined with dew points of 70 or 75, I got to tell you, I never felt that way in terms of humidity and discomfort ever. And I'm happy to say I've not been down there at that particular time of the year since, and I don't want to feel that way again. I can't believe how people actually go through that
You get
who live
used to it. Your
down
body
there.
gets used to it. I had 3 years in New Orleans where, basically from June to September, it was, low 90s every day, very high humidity, the 3 o'clock in the afternoon thunderstorm. And, you go out in the morning and you basically would need a shower in the time it took you to walk from your front door to the car. Where there was no air conditioning, or you get in your car and you put your hands on your steering wheel and you come away with third-degree burns.
Ah,
But you do get used. I got used to it after the first summer. Um, it wasn't, you handle it, and then as soon as the temperature drops below 70, you're reaching for a sweater and a blanket.
right.
So just like the folks that live up in further north, how do they stand it when it goes? You get these minus double digits and big double digits at that. I mean, what does minus 40 feel like when you go outside? Um, but if that's your regular, that's where you are. Um, I think your body does get used to it. Mr. Brilla has hit super chat button tonight, and we thank him and hope everything is going well with your mom. I know knee issues can be a big deal, so you take care of her and let her know if she's going to wind up getting new knees that uh, she'll be roller skating before too long.
Yeah.
That's amazing what they with the medical technology with the replacement, with knees and things. Even the surgery is not as difficult as what it was just a few years ago. The medical, progress has been insane. John Trabacchino is bringing up a bunch of winters. 57, 58, 59, 60, 60, 61. That was a good one. 66, 67, 68, 69, the Lindsay snowstorm. 69, 70, 77, 78, yes. 92, 93, okay, because that's a superstorm. 93, 94, and 95, 96.
76, 76, 77, which I don't think he listed. But to me, 76, 77 was interesting. That was the Alberta Clipper winter where we kept getting one clipper after another after another. and we never got a major storm. We usually ended up getting 2 and 3 and 4 inches at most. That was the year also, January of '77, of the Buffalo blizzard, where they picked up, I think, what, a foot? No, not a foot. They picked up 5 feet of snow
Yeah.
span of just a 24 or 36 hour period. I remember listening, Joe. I was living in the Bronx then, as was I think you were in 1977, listening to KBW, WKBW in Buffalo, 1500 on the dial AM, and they boomed in late at night. And I remember listening to the newscaster who just simply said, "All events in the city tonight are
Are
canceled.
done.
Nobody's going anywhere," which is
Done.
amazing because they usually are prepared for big snow and snow squalls or whatever. But that shut down Buffalo completely. That one, and the cold front. We got that cold front that came on through that afternoon or evening. We got some snow squalls, and I think the temperature plunged on down to like near zero. And the next day, it never got much higher than 7 or 8 degrees here in New York.
That particular winter, one of the things I remember about it down here was the fact that we had with all these systems going by, and probably the deep upper troughs that swang through. We had a number of those days where we got those snow squalls that came on through. Used to call them the 1 inch blizzards because you would
Yeah,
get, a coating to an inch. They would last about 15 minutes, complete whiteout conditions, and then suddenly skies would just go clear.
right.
And they're kind of fun actually to experience if you don't have to drive in it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think I told the story. I was once, we had, where I lived, we had sliding glass doors on the side of the house. And I remember the phone rang and I went over to pick it up. When I passed the window the first time, nothing was happening. "Oh, hi, how you doing?" I had my back to the window and I turned around. Literally, it was like 2 minutes later to look out the window and it was like zero visibility and snow. I couldn't believe it. I almost like dropped the phone out of my hand. But
Oh
as you
yeah.
just mentioned, within 5 minutes, it was all over. The skies had cleared. The moon was out. It was, but you're right. They're fun when you get them like that, in out.
Oh, in and out.
Yeah,
David Schwartz was asking Long Island getting the big ice storm in 1978 was, I believe, on January 13th. It was the week before, 6 days before the snowstorm of the 19th, 20th.
right.
But the first one, there were three storms in that series, and the first one was, I believe, on the Friday night before, and that was a serious ice storm for Long Island. There was a lot of damage from that. Supposed to change over to rain, but cold air there was no wind, and the cold air just kind of, the temperatures sort of sat in the upper 20s to around 30 for the entire night with heavy rain falling, and there was a lot of freezing rain. So that was, I believe, looked around January 12th or 13th,
Then we had another.
of 1978.
Then we had a storm a few days before the biggie on the 20th, right?
Right,
That dropped about 3 or 4
right.
inches.
That was on the 17th, the 16th or the 17th.
Right.
And then the 19th storm, the 19th, 20th, which was the forecast. The forecast was for that night before the snow started, was for a coating to an inch before it changed to rain. And then every hour, the Weather Service had to keep asking. But always remember, the new forecast was, then it was 1 to 2, then 2 to 4, 3 to 5, four to
Upping, upping, up.
six, 5 to 8. They had to just keep going. You
And
know.
we remember watching our mentor on CBS2 that night, Alan Casper, telling us that it had begun to go to ice pellets, I think, down in South Jersey,
Atlantic City
Atlantic
was
City. Yeah,
was losing the low level cold air. That was a quote. For
right.
someone to say that in 1978 on television in New York City, from in a weathercast, it was surprising that he wasn't fired for it.
He couldn't make it in. He couldn't make it in the next day. If I remember correctly,
Right,
next time you talk to him, because I know you chat quite a bit. And
twice
because
today.
in my memory, he wasn't there the next day. I think right after the storm, right after his 11 o'clock report, he must have jumped in his car, headed on back down to Seaside Heights. But he couldn't get back to New York the next day. I think
No,
Joe Whitty, who was his cohort at Channel Two, was worked.
you there?
Are you back?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I took an internet hit. It just happened yesterday, but I'm back. I'm back on. So yeah, you
Okay.
say he just couldn't make it on the air.
Yeah, I wonder where the third member of that weather team back in '78 was. All I remember was seeing Joe Whitty. I didn't remember seeing anybody else. You know who I'm alluding
No,
to.
I know, and that's why I'm remaining I'm remaining silent with a smile on my face.
Okay.
And you
But they had
know,
all three of them. They had all three of them there for for the second storm, the one in. In fact, they went on the air for the second big storm, February 5th of '78. So it's February, no, February 7th of '78. Correct?
yes, the 6th was the Sunday, so it was the
Yeah,
7th and 8th.
Folks. Here's a team, a news team for you. Jim Jensen and John Tesh.
Yes.
They led off at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I think they had Joe Whitty was in the studio. Uh, Alan Casper was outside on 57th Street, and Mr. G was somewhere with a report. I think of Marilyn Shearer, I think was her name, and they were out somewhere. I think in front of Tiffany's. In fact, I think that the comment was, well, if you're going to have breakfast at Tiffany's today, you better bring your snow boots or
Yeah,
whatever.
it's funny. You're ringing some memories. I remember watching that coverage. What was unusual about that, Joe, was if I'm pretty sure about this, but WCBS Channel 2 in 1978, that was the first time any station did any kind of wall-to-wall weather coverage
Yeah.
for a weather event.
Yep.
It never happened before. Now there weren't many opportunities for it to happen before, but I believe that they may have been the only station in town that was doing something with regards to the blizzard of '78, doing that wall-to-wall weather coverage. So
Somewhere I've got a cassette. I made an air check. Don't Unfortunately don't have the video, but I have the audio from the time that coverage began. And I still remember Jim Jensen coming on at 9 o'clock in the morning, remembering that 17 days earlier we got hit with 15 or 20 inches of snow.
right.
The first thing that came out of his mouth was, "Good morning. Well, here we go again."
Yep, exactly. You know what? You're bringing a lot of. I'm feeling good now tonight that you brought this up, if only because of the fact that I'm discovering that at least my long-term memory is intact. As long as somebody is there to jar it with a
Yep.
few familiar things, and I distinctly remember everything that you've said, including the specifics of Jim Jensen opening up that particular show.
And
That's
and
it's
Cas-
so funny.
and Alan Casper actually made a tribute to the general meteorological community, the forecasters in general. He said, professionally speaking, he said, this is not blowing my own horn, but blowing the horn of every professional meteorologist in New York City. Now, remember, this is 1978. He said, this is the first storm in my memory that was forecasted, a big one now, that was forecasted 24 to 48 hours in advance. And then he brought up other cases over the last 10 or 20 years where, we started out with 2 to 4, and then we ended up upping, and we ended up with 15 to 20. But he said, as far as I'm concerned, 20 inches is certainly not out of the question, and we certainly owe all of us in the meteorological profession a you know, big celebration
Yeah.
about the fact that we were on target with that. So I remember Friday afternoon, um, the National Weather Service at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. I read this somewhere. They put in the first phone call to the Sanitation Department of New York, telling them that we were going to be in big trouble starting Monday morning. That the 72-hour 500 was indicating
And that's as
that
far
we were
out
going to.
as they had was 72
Right,
hours.
right,
Yeah, and only the upper air 500 millibar. There was no surface that went with it either.
correct. Those are the
Now,
Stone Ages, Joe.
what's that?
The Stone Ages.
The Stone Ages. They've gone the way of the rotary telephone and the 8-track.
My first boss in this business, Todd Gross. Some of you may know of him. In fact, if you ever saw The Perfect Storm, the movie The Perfect Storm, the meteorologist in Boston who was going crazy over the development of that major storm in the movie, that was Todd Gross. Well, anyway, many years before, back in the late '70s, Todd had a company called CompuWeather. I worked for Todd, and he was the one who taught me, Joe, how to draw the surface features on an upper air map.
Hmm.
And that's how I was able to discern, as he was too, that we were in for a real real major,
Major.
major crushing here
Oh yeah.
on that Monday with the 72-hour 500 millibar map.
Well, we got no such event now. I'm just trying to struggle for, whatever snow flurries that are going on outside. I can't even really see from the window I have here. There's not enough outside light. So,
Right.
and the inside light's kind of reflecting off of it. So I have no idea what's going on outside, if
Can I
anything
make
at
a
all.
Can I make a request?
Please.
I know we probably could go beyond 8 o'clock, but I've been looking forward to this match of the century between the three guys on Jeopardy, and
Oh yeah, go no. I was gonna wrap it up right now.
that's supposed to happen in about 3 minutes.
All
So
right. So look, let's say goodnight to everybody. Thanks for being here. Joe and I will be back tomorrow.
we'll be here.
Okay. So stay safe, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Good night, everybody.
Au reservoir.